All right, will you pray with me, please? Lord God, I am so incredibly thankful for this opportunity to be here with your people, to look at our lives and to look at our relationship with you and look at how we can deepen that relationship, Lord, how we can grow as a church and grow as a people in your love and your grace. I ask these things in your name. Amen. So a woman owned a parrot that could say only one thing. Who is it? For years and years, she had been trying to teach the bird to extend its vocabulary, but it refused to utter anything other than, who is it? One day, the woman had sent for the plumber, and because she had to go out shopping, she arranged for him to find the key under the mat outside the front door. The plumber duly arrived, found the key, let himself in, and set to work. Naturally, the parrot, hearing someone in the house with an unfamiliar tread, decided to give a recital, who is it? Called the parrot. The plumber, called the workman. The parrot was not satisfied. He wanted to see who the stranger was. Who is it? He called again, and again the plumber yelled out, it's the plumber. Again and again the bird called out, who is it? And again the poor bewildered plumber responded, it's the plumber, it's the plumber, it's the plumber. Eventually, in a fury, the man roamed the house, going from room to room, trying to find out who was calling him, but he failed to realize that it was the parrot. For a whole hour, he dashed around the house, growing increasingly desperate and shouting out, it's the plumber! Finally, the exhausted man fainted in the hall. Just at that moment, the woman of the house entered and saw the unconscious figure on the carpet and said, who is it? The parrot replied, it's the plumber! We're going to find out what that had to do with the sermon. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But for those of you who don't know, this last weekend I had the opportunity to go to Marshalltown, Iowa and speak at a youth retreat. And it's one of those things where you go into a situation thinking you know what it's going to be like, and then you get there and it's just not even close to what you think it's going to be like. You know, I was thinking maybe 50 youth. I'm like, 50 would be really good. Well, 250 junior hires showed up, and all between the ages of like 5th grade and 8th grade, and it was pretty intimidating when suddenly, the entire sanctuary about this size was packed full of junior hires. And it was really exciting and really cool, but the band, when they started playing, they were playing, and then the sound system just totally broke while they were playing. And so all you could hear was the drums, and they had the nightmare of trying to get that fixed. And they finally got it fixed for me to speak, and I got up to speak. And, I'm talking with the junior hires, and I realized, none of them are listening to me. All of them, and really, maybe except for the exception of one or two, were having separate conversations while I was speaking. And so I did what I know to do in my own youth group. I go, hey, right up here. I had to do that numerous times with these kids while the adults just kind of stood in the back laughing at me, kind of like, and I'm thinking, why aren't you helping me with these kids? But I finally figured it out, went down, and there's a very big difference from when you're up here and then you come down like 2 inches away from somebody. They kind of have to listen. So I went down off the stage and I was speaking to them, and what I ended up speaking to them is when you're in junior high and in high school, and when you're of that age, you really start to ask, like, who am I? And why am I here? You kind of start to want to know, like, who you are, discover what purpose you have for your life. And this is the time that you start asking this. So I thought, this is really a really great topic. I want to talk to kids about their identity and who they are in Christ and things like this. And as I was speaking and finished the first session, I got more of a response from the adults than I did from the kids. I had more adults say, I really needed that. And I started to think, it's not just these kids that suffer with their identity. It's everybody. Even as I was, doing this and looking at, like, okay, who am I? I started to kind of ask, who am I? Why am I here? And I think even as adults, it may even get a little worse because, you're an adult, you have a job, and you're going through this, and suddenly you're like, man, I don't even know who I am anymore. life has just kind of flown by, and suddenly I've kind of lost sight of who I am and things like this. So I just had this realization that, we need this too. We need to talk about our identity. We need to talk about where we're at and what our purpose is. So that is where we're going to be today. We all need an identity. And so I'm going to ask a couple of you, don't freak out if I ask you, Shelly, let's go with Shelly first. Shelly, she knew. Who are you? A caregiver? You look after others' children. You look after your own family. Okay. Dean, who are you? Who are you to yourself? No, that's fine. Kelby. A dad? Okay, good. Okay. Cassandra Wolf, who are you? Yes, really. Daughter of Christ? Yes, good. Who else wants to be put on the spot? Isaac. A student. Okay, good. Okay, this is exactly what I wanted. The reason I ask you this is because most of us, when we are asked this question, like, who are you? We answer with something that we do. Like, when I did this exercise with the kids, I'm a volleyball player, or I'm a straight A student. And I asked them what that's like, because I've never really experienced an A really much before. I said, it must be nice. No, but I asked them, and everyone responded with something that they do. You ask, even if people ask me, who are you? I say, well, I'm a pastor. I lead worship at my church. I do these things. And does that really answer the question of who you are? Kind of. It answers what you do. But there's this movie that I watched where this same question happened, and he was asking this person, it was an anger management class, and he's asking his student, he's like, who are you? And he's like, well, I do this, I do that. And he's like, no, I didn't ask you what you do. I asked who you are. And he's like, well, I'm this, and I do this. And the teacher goes, no, I didn't ask what you do. I asked who you are. And suddenly this man is getting furious because he can't answer the question. He doesn't know how to answer it, because this is how we are programmed to answer that question. We don't answer it with an answer of who we are. We answer with what do we do? And why is it? And that's my question is, why do we define ourselves by what we do? Have you ever thought about this? Why do we define ourselves by the things that we do? Probably because that's what the world defines us, right? That's how the world defines us. What do you do? Maybe you're a farmer, you're a teacher, maybe you're a coach, but these are how you are defined as a person. The first thing you're going to say is, when people ask you who you are, is I'm going to say I'm a pastor. That's just my default answer, because I don't know what else to say. Because what do you say? Because we are programmed to talk. Who we are is defined by what we do. That is the world we grow up in. It is the world we operate in. But here's the thing. Not only the things you do now, but also the things you have done in your past seem to define you. It's the things that we do, and then suddenly we look back at our past. And I don't know about you, but if you've done things that you're not proud of in the past, some people know you for those things. Have you noticed this? People just tend to, Cash and I experience this all the time when we go home to our hometown. It's, people are like, oh, Jesse's back in town, lock your doors. No? You haven't heard that?
Why would they say that?
Well, exactly. Lock your doors, because, I don't know. But, when, in high school, I was kind of a jerk. I was just kind of known for being a jerk. I was very full of myself. I was, probably one of the only ones good enough at guitar to kind of do things. And, it was just one of those things where I kind of got a big head. And I was known as a jerk. That's how I treated people. And, so when I go back to Haviland every once in a while, the people who knew me in high school have a hard time seeing me as I am now. And I hope I'm not a jerk anymore. If I am, call me out on it. Don't you raise your hand. But, this happens to a lot of us where the thing that we've done in the past tends to define us, especially in a small town where if you've grown up there and you did something way back in the past, oh man, do people let you live that down? Very rarely. People will remind you of it. Maybe they're not trying to be mean, but they remind you of what you did. They remind you of who you were back in the day. It's just a thing that happens. We're defined by those things. Like you're sitting at a table in a small town or really anywhere and somebody comes in and you start hearing who's that? Oh, well, remember they did that one thing like 3 years ago. Oh, they're them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know them. How many of you have been in a conversation like that? We can all raise our hands because we've all been in a conversation like that. Because it's like, who are they? And you try to describe them and you're like, well, okay, what did they do? What did they do that would spark a memory? That's just how we operate. And we've all experienced it, but here's the thing. It is not what you've done that defines you, but it is whom you belong to. Let me say it again. It is not what you do that defines you, but it is who you belong to, or to whom you belong. I want that to sink in a little bit, because we are so programmed and wired to be defined by what we do. We don't understand what it's like to be defined by who we belong to. It's easier when you're a kid because people will say, well, who are you? You can say who your parents are, and they'll go, oh, okay. Even in the biblical times, people were known for who their father was. Like if you've watched any like medieval movies, they'll be like Jesse, son of Stephen. Have you ever heard this? Like they're defined by their parents. And it's the same for us. It's the same for us as Christians. And so here we're going to look at 1 Peter 2, chapter 2, 9 through 10, if you want to go there with me. It says this, but you are God's chosen and special people. You are a group of royal priests and a holy nation. God has brought you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Now you must tell all the wonderful things that He has done. Once you had no identity as a people, but now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy. And so Peter here touches on something very important. That without Christ, we have no identity. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, it was very much so that they were gods. They were made in His image. It was very easy to see that they were gods. But then something happened and sin entered into the picture. And so suddenly, Adam and Eve are no longer defined by God, but they're defined as the people who first sinned. The people who first gave in to temptation. They are now defined by sin. And from that point on, we are born into this life defined by our sin. By what we have done. And we are defined by that sin. And it is not until we give our lives over to Christ that we get a new name. That we get a new identity. It is because of the sin in our lives that we have no identity. And not only no identity, but a false identity. Because what Christ did and what God did when He created us to be in communion with Him, to be His children. But what sin does is it creates a wall. And the more you sin, the more that wall gets bigger and bigger and bigger between you and God. All sin is a separation between you and God. Anytime you sin, you're kind of taking a step back, a step back and a step back from God. And then suddenly we're asking, well, God feels so distant. But God isn't the one who stepped away. It is us who, through our sin, continue to step away, and then we wonder why God feels distant. You see, when we take on the false identity of sinner, we let that sin define us. People know us for our sin. That is how we are defined in the world. It is the sin that defines us. But I'll tell you this, that we are not defined by our sin anymore. If you have given your life to Christ and have found that saving faith, it is not sin that defines you anymore. Before Christ, you did not belong to anyone. You belong to the world. And this is the other thing I talk to the kids about, is the difference between kingdom of man and kingdom of God. And when you don't have an identity, when you are not identified by Christ in your life, suddenly you take on this kingdom of man identity, that you are in the world. The world will tell you so many different messages of, like the magazines will tell you what clothes to wear, what size you're supposed to be. The TV will tell you what you need to buy and how much it's worth. And so through these world messages and through this kingdom of man identity, we get this idea that unless we follow these things in the world, then we are not worth anything. I was telling the kids that in junior high, it was really cool to have crazy baggy pants, bleach blonde your hair, and use gel to spike it straight up to the ceiling. And if you didn't do that, you weren't cool. And so what did all of us do? We got baggy pants, we bleach blonded our hair, and we spiked it up. This is what the world does. It tells you who you need to be, and if you cannot be that person, then you are worth nothing. This is how the world works. You see it every day without even knowing it. And so the world tries to tell you, this is who you are supposed to be. And if you can't live up to that, then you don't have an identity. Then you are no one. If you don't have a job, or if you didn't go to college, or all these things that the world will tell you, that then you're not worth it. And that's just not true. That's just not true. We were created to be identified by God. We were created to be identified by God. We were made in His image. And when sin entered the picture, we took on that false identity. And so here again, in Romans 3:22 through 24, it says this: we are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. And this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who you are. For everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard, yet God, with undeserved kindness, declares that we are righteous. He did this through Christ Jesus when He freed us from the penalty of our sins. When we lay our sin at the foot of the cross and say, I am done letting this be my identity. I'm tired of being defined by this. I'm ready for you to define me. When you lay those things at the cross and you let Christ enter your life, you get a new name, and that new name is child of God. And that new name is redeemed. That new name is reconciled. When you lay these things at the foot of the cross and you surrender your life to Christ, you get the identity you were always supposed to have. You throw off your false identity and you take on the identity that Christ had always meant for you to have. Our past no longer defines us or haunts us in that. Because some of the things we've done in our past, not everyone knows about. And it kind of haunts you. And some days you're good at keeping it secret, and some days it starts to eat at you a little bit. And it's these things that you're like, oh my gosh, And sometimes, in your relationship with God, you are defined by Christ, but suddenly that old identity starts coming up a little bit. And suddenly you start thinking, oh, that old identity, that's the real me. That's the real me. And it's not. It isn't the real you because we are God's chosen people. He gave us a new identity and He brought us out of darkness into His marvelous light. This is how God works. He wants you to have your identity back. He says, look, I had this for you from the beginning. This is who you were supposed to be from the beginning, but you decided to sin and take on the false identity, and all He's asking is for you to come home. I told a story about this father who had two sons. And they were a very rich family. These sons had everything. They had new phones, new computers, the nicest clothes. They had everything that you could possibly want. But the younger brother of the two finally decided, he figured it out. He's like, you know what? When my dad dies, I'm going to get more money. He's like, well, maybe I'm going to go talk to him. So he goes and talks to his father and says, you know what, Father? I know that when you die, I will receive an inheritance, but I'd rather not wait until you die. I'd like that inheritance now. I'd like that money now. And so what he's saying to his father is, I really don't care if you're dead or not. But I'd like the money that is mine. And so the father, brokenhearted, gives his son this money of $50,000 he gives him. He gives him all this money. And so the son leaves home, goes off into these cities and spends his money. He's spending it on drinking, drugs, everything imaginable. Parties, clothes, everything you could possibly want, he bought. And suddenly he looks at his bank account years later and he is completely and totally broke. He spent all of his money. The things that he bought have destroyed him. And he is working for barely money to survive. Not nearly enough to survive. And so he realizes, my father's workers have it better than I do. At least they get to eat. And so he's like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to try and explain to my father what's going on. And so he decides he's going home, and he's on his way home, and he's getting his speech ready. Have you ever done something wrong and you're getting ready to tell somebody and you kind of get your speech ready of I know I did this wrong. Here's the reasons. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. I don't have to get presents for the next 2 years. I don't know what you do to bribe your parents or tell them something, but for me, I experienced this in 3rd grade. I made that long walk to my dad's car after my first detention. That walk home, or the walk of shame, is not a fun walk. And so he's on his way home after years. In the distance, he sees his father, and he starts to get that pit in his stomach, and he knows. He's like, this isn't going to be good. I basically told my father that I want him dead. I basically said that I don't care if you're dead or alive, I want my money. And then I took that money and I spent every cent of it on things that don't help me. I spent it on things that hurt me, and it's gone. There is no reason for my father to forgive me. There's no reason. I don't even deserve to be his son anymore. These are the thoughts going through his head as he sees his father. He starts to notice that his father is running towards him. He's like, oh no, my father's going to tackle me and hurt me. He's going to get his revenge. And so his father is close enough now to hear his voice. And so he's like, okay, before you do anything rash, I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry. And he's getting closer and closer. And then before he knows it, his father gives him the most giant bear hug you could ever want. And as his father is giving him this bear hug, he's trying to explain to his father. He's like, I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't. And his father's like, shh, don't speak. And he calls back to his house and he says, slaughter a cow, we're having burgers. We're having a feast. Start cooking. Invite everybody. And I'm taking you out right now. We're getting you some new clothes. Here's the family ring. You can wear this. And the son is in shock. He's in shock. And every time he tries to explain to his father and tries to apologize, his father's like, no, stop. Come on, let's go party. Let's go celebrate. And so during this party, the older brother who never left the house, who continued to work for his father, who was loyal, came to his father and noticed that there was a party and his brother was back. And so he asked his father, he's like, Dad, what in the world is going on? We didn't even know if my brother was alive. We just knew that he took off with his money and went and spent it on everything under the sun that would hurt him. Why on earth does he get a party? He doesn't deserve a party. If anyone deserves a party, it's me. I didn't leave you. I didn't take my inheritance. I've been loyal. The father looks at him and says, Son, I love you, and everything I have is yours. But your brother was lost, and now he is found. If you don't recognize the story, this is the story of the prodigal son that Jesus was telling his disciples. And you see, this is a great story of the son coming home, feeling defined by what he did, identified by the mistakes he made in life, thinking that it was those things that would mark him forever. His father didn't care. His father cared to the fact that he was home. Then the older brother, in a different light, was defined by what he did. He's saying, look, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I deserve this party. It doesn't always swing as you're identified by the bad things, but if you take the good things and define yourself by those things too, that's still the wrong identity. You could be the greatest person on earth. You could be a humanitarian and do all these things, but if Christ is absent from your life, it's still the wrong identity. It's still not right. But the Father says that it is not what you've done, it's the fact that you are back and you belong to me. That's your identity. This is exactly how God sees you. If you are lost, if you are feeling purposeless, He is waiting with open arms to say, you belong to me. Come back to me. And so quickly, I'm going to show you a video that has to do with this. Colossians 1:22 says this, Yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. Because of the identity that Christ has given us, we can stand before him, before his throne, before him and say, I know I'm no longer defined by those things, but because I am in you, you see no fault in me. I am holy and blameless. Because of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, we are now called children of God. That love and forgiveness and grace is at all times present in our lives. Now it is not written all over us what we did in our past, but when people see us, they know we are a child of God. But we must live that way. One of the things it says in the video is, I will move on. You cannot hold on to your old identity. You can't have one foot in and one foot out. You have to be fully a child of God. And so I encourage you, as we leave this place today, as we continue our lives, and realize that you are no longer defined by what you do, but you are defined by Christ. And you are holy and blameless and faultless in his sight because of Jesus. Will you pray with me, please? God, I ask that you continue to write this on our hearts. That it is not the things in our past or the things in our present that define us, Lord, but it is the future that you provide in our lives. And our future is love, forgiveness, grace, and joy in our identity in you. I pray, God, that we can fully embody this identity and leave the old person behind because we are a new creation in you. Help us to realize this, Lord. I ask this in your name. Amen.